and I'm happy to welcome you, uh, our good friend, excellent drummer and teacher, Claus Hessler. Hello, Klaus.
Hey.
Hey, how are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, as good can be in times like these when everything is like sort of crazy. But I mean, what the heck? It is what it is. So we
I,
make the best out of it. Yeah.
I, so you're good, family's good, all's good.
Family's all fine, which is the most important thing. And of course, everybody lost something in this crazy lockdown times. And if it's only money, we are lucky. If we only lose money, it still hurts. But I mean, not to think about the aspect that you lose family members under these terrible situations. So I think if it's only money, it's okay.
Yeah, health is most important. Yeah, so today's lesson's topic, collapsed rudiments, right? Can you give us a little bit more insight about it? What's the concept about this, and how can you adapt this also to the drum kit?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, first of all, the thing about collapsed rudiments really is it was one of the favorite playgrounds of my, I think, most important mentor, Jim Chapin. And when saying collapsed rudiments, to give you a short definition, it's actually about you take a certain sticking, a certain order of right and left strokes, and you change the distances of the strokes, but you never really change the sticking in any substantial way. So needless to say, you can collapse it in terms of you just narrow down the distances from stroke to stroke, or you can also widen the distance, which would then be expanding the rudiment. And being creative with that is just an incredible tool to come up not just with additional input and creative ideas about rudiments. It also, I mean, heavily affects the whole drum set game because there are, I mean, literally endless possibilities that you can create out of that.
Right. So this was already a deep insight. I suggest I let you jump into it and make space on the screen, right? I'm hide in the background, and I come back probably half an hour or so for the question and answer session. Okay?
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
See you soon.
Great. See you in a bit. So, hello everybody, and welcome to this session on collapsed rudiments. As Christian mentioned, we're going to be making this little presentation for about, say, 30 minutes before we jump into some question and answer things. And I can already see you guys entering in the comments here. There's Pedro Barahona from Chile. Hey, great. Michael Scott from Canada. Peter Graf from Oberbayern. All in the house. So collapsed rudiments, I should say, as I already gave you that short definition, is about changing distances between the strokes of a rudiment. And I mean, you can take a traditional rudiment in terms of a paradiddle or a double drag tap or a single flammed mill or whatever it is, or you can also just come up with any other pattern that you design. Needless to say that. First of all, let me give you a couple of benefits that you're going to get out of this. First of all, it's about really getting ultimate ability for dynamics in any desired spot, really. And the other thing is, it's about ultimate control of rhythmic distances from stroke to stroke. And if you think further, I mean, controlling distances from stroke to stroke, that's what we do as drummers all the time. So being in control or in utmost control of exactly that will for sure make you a better drummer. And for those of you who are serious about this little treat here, there's also a 4-page PDF that I put together, and I put a link on the Sabian page where you can download that on the Sabian Facebook page. You can also go to klaushessler.com to the news section. The last news entry has exactly a link to that PDF. So with these little definition things in mind, let's look at a couple of more things, what collapsed rudiments can actually teach you and how that can improve your playing. First of all, it teaches you about some sort of deeper understanding of, say, rhythmic and coordinative structures, let's say. For instance, let's say you learn how this here, just a simple hand-to-hand molar triplet, if you will, can be transformed into one of the simplest and at the same time one of the most difficult rudiments I can think of, which is the inverted flam tap. So changing the distances between the notes makes you go from here in a step-by-step fashion to here and ultimately to here. And back to the triplet. So, and so forth. The funny thing is, going back to the alternating hand-to-hand triplet makes it much easier for you to get into that inverted flam tap rudiment, which is actually not as easy as it may look like, because most of the students actually fall into the regular standard flam tap as opposed to into the inverted flam tap, which is a collapsed hand-to-hand triplet. So, I mean, that in itself was a game-changing thing for me already. And hey, there's Jim Ferry from the UK tuning in. Hey, and another aspect actually was to find out how you can use these collapsed and expanded rudiments around the kit. So, in a very simple way, let's look at the inverted flam tap that I just explained to you, and just orchestrate that between hi-hat and snare, and you will find out already in that simple setting, it makes you create some sort of drum and bass-like groove. Check this out. So again, it was just based out of the hand-to-hand triplet going into the inverted flam tap, and that simply makes a great drum and bass kind of like groove, which is very much based on exactly that rudiment. So just one example out of many that you could come up with. There's also another thing, which is another exercise, which is very simple but very difficult at the same time, and it teaches you a lot of game-changing aspects in this whole idea of collapsed rudiments, which is about this simple phrase: one loud and one soft stroke played at the very same time with both of your hands. But my right hand stays in place, my left hand is slowing down. So by going through this cycle, you will create a lot of different flam-like settings that you usually will not use. And it's really interesting to later hear then how that sounds in a drum kit application. So first of all, here's the exercise, which is taken from a poster that Dom Famularo and myself have put out, Collapsed Rudiments poster. Here's the exercise. Check it out. And here we are again. So you notice the ending and the start of the pattern is the same. I just shift the left hand until both structures, right and left, really end in the unison setting as they were starting with. So that's a pretty incredible thing to do. It's needless to say that there are some sort of, say, technical presumptions, some sort of prerequisites that you should have in your toolbox in order to be playing that. Because if you really want to produce that by will, it's going to be tough times ahead. But for sure, we're going to clarify some of that in the question and answer section after this little class. Okay, so if you got any questions, write them down, save them for later, or have them now in the comments, or maybe rather later, where we're going to get much more into the topic and try to clarify what it is you really need to have down. Another thing which really changed a lot for me was to use collapsed rudiments to widen the spectrum of, say, modern drum set applications. So, for instance, just as collapsing a pattern, you can expand a pattern and make wider distances, bigger distances from stroke to stroke. So one of my personal favorites still to the very day is the double drag tap, which essentially would be this. So with a pulse underneath it. Would be this. So since that rudiment has actually 5 positions, if you will, of which 2 are double strokes, if you make even distances from stroke to stroke, you end up having a structure which is 7 equal beats, if you will, creating a septuplet. So out of this, so, I mean, what does that do for you? First of all, or most importantly, 2 things, I guess. On the one hand, by understanding that you need to give this drag, this double stroke, you need to give that drag a place. Because if you don't do that, the whole concept is not working. And so this may lead you back towards a very fundamental aspect of rudimental drumming, which is about, say, correct and authentic phrasing. So just for those of you who would think a double drag tap is usually played like this, the answer is no. Sorry to say. So it really, and that's also the same, in the very same way how it's used in French and Swiss traditional drumming, and also in ancient American rudimental drumming. It's really, it's exactly that. So using this concept of widening the distance between the strokes on the double drag will possibly result in a drum set application that may sound like this. Check this out. So with that idea in mind, there's actually a lot of stuff that you can do with just that simple double drag tap rudiment, which is, by the way, a very old rudiment. In Swiss traditional rudimental drumming, it's known as a Tagwachtstreich, while in France, usually people relate to that phrase as the so-called Diane. And in these two rudimental schools, let's say, that phrase was used to wake up people or to wake up soldiers. That was something that was played early in the morning at sunrise, where later American soldiers in the camp duty would play the three camps, which is a 5-stroke roll structure, by the way. But that's just some little piece of history on the side, which is another of my hobbies, because one hobby needs to be, I'm afraid to say. So again, that's just about some of the benefits you get out of collapsed rudiments. So I was mentioning about the aspect of flams, and the aspect that most students actually are not used to play, say, more exotic variations or settings of flams. For instance, with the grace note being an accent. And although this is not a standard rudiment in the American sense, let's say, it's really, I mean, in the beginning it's hard, I should say, but there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can use to produce sort of swag, drunken kind of beats. So let's say if I were to take an example like this, it's strictly alternating single strokes. And if I were to just accent the fourth 16th note in terms of, and so forth. So imagine I would make that accent a accented grace note. Then what I would get out of this here would be so it may look easier than it really is, but believe me, if you want to find out what's happening in the mind of your student who's not able to play a flam right away, for all you teachers out there, just try on the spot to play a flam with the accent being a grace note before the beat and the main note being a soft note on the beat. And if you can manage to do that right away, great, thumbs up. If you can't manage to do that, you possibly have an idea what's happening in the mind of your student. So with that setting, let's say, if you put this around the drums, you get something like this. First of all, the expanded version, and then going into the accented grace note, which is a traditional French rudiment, by the way, which in the earlier days was called the French coup de charge. Now it's more part of a pattern that they call the coup de coulée. But that's, again, just some little history and aspects on the side, which you can forget right away. So here's the example, first expanded and then the flammed version with the accent on the grace note. Check it out. So this accent on the grace note actually adds some sort of flavor which you possibly have not been using before. So, and that was just an example which is not really, say, a standard rudiment like a paradiddle or a 5-stroke roll or anything like that. It's just that little ingredient, that little spice of adding the accent to the grace note, which I think is just amazing. So another aspect that you may find helpful is expanding distances even more, which may take you towards, say, unexpected vocabulary and unexpected, undiscovered potential. Let's say if I were to use that very same example of this. And if I were to expand the distances between the notes, since I have 5 strokes in that pattern, it automatically makes me play quintuplets without thinking anything towards like, oh, I need to play a quintuplet. So check out what happens. So again, I mean, not a huge invention, but just something that that makes you sound different and something that changes your vocabulary, because you're adding something that was not there before. In a practicing routine, I would always recommend to combine new material with old material to find out, okay, how is really that enrichment of the new phrase. And you don't just use the new word, just like you use a new word in a language that you learn. You never just learn that word. You try to learn a sentence that sort of makes sense, which will ultimately become a more complete strategy to learn something. What collapsed rudiments also do for you is it possibly teaches you more about shifted or, say, inverted positions of certain rudiments. Because as you change distances, widening or closing the distance, you also look into all the different shifted versions of a pattern, which we many times do with a paradiddle, but never with any other rudiment. So it's kind of funny what's happening if you're only changing distances on a 5-stroke roll. So imagine a 5-stroke roll being played between hi-hat and snare could be something like this. You may also want to use that in a triplet-like setting, which would sound as such. But things start to be really funny if you're beginning the 5-stroke roll on a different position, like say on one of the double strokes. Say, for instance, like that. Imagine. Plus, on top of that, imagine using that as a 3-note grouping. Then it's going to be some real interesting shit. Check this out. So it really starts to create very intelligent sounding 3-note groupings, which are, I mean, still 3-note groupings, but for sure not the ones you may have been using before. So reaching that untapped potential that was there forever, because I mean, most of you out there can for sure play a 5-stroke roll, but I'm sure you weren't thinking about the 10 different settings which there are to it. And not a lot of people actually do that. So that would be some huge potential that you could get out of this. And finally, you could really make it some sort of a freak show and use rudiments that you haven't heard of before, like traditional Swiss or French rudiments, and orchestrate them, expand them, collapse them, and just complete that whole procedure. So imagine one of my favorite ones, a favorite Swiss rudiment is what they call the final of 7. So on the snare, it sounds like this. So something like that. The only thing I did was at first I played the rudiment as it was on the snare. Then I just adapted it to the snare and hi-hat setting in the very same, using the very same rhythm, nothing else. And then I did expand the pattern, going from the original quintuplet structure, which is this, to this. So in essence, you can also come up with the idea, okay, understanding about collapsing rudiments makes me change back and forth between different rhythmic layers in a much different fashion as before. Because, I mean, here, going from a quintuplet structure with accents, soft and loud, and sticking and double strokes, and the whole shoot and caboodle, changing seamlessly to a septuplet structure using the same sticking. I mean, that's not easy in the beginning, but it's actually much easier than most of you think out there. There would be tons of more stuff, and I see the comments here rolling down. We have Matt Kent, hey, Bernhard Henke, wow, it's all here. So Heinz Kronberger is here from Drums and Percussion, very good. Tobias Gutjahr, yeah, man. I mean, so far with that little presentation, I would like to close my big screen here now with a little tour through my kit, just to have you see what I'm using here. Of course, maybe let me change my cameras here so you can really see what these are. So on this side here, I got a closed head, which consists of a 14-inch mini China and a 13-inch artisan hi-hat on top. I have my signature sounds here, the 9-inch Alu Bell and Gone Bob's Alex Acuna cowbell stuff. I got a complete brand new set of HHX complete stuff here, the 14-inch medium hats, a complex thin crash 18 with a splash cymbal underneath, in case you wonder why it sounds like this. Of course, I do have the garage rights, which are an essential part of my sound, because I mean, I just love that dark, definite sound that always comes with great articulation, but still I can lean into the cymbal heavily without the cymbal actually exploding. It's just my signature sound. There's no Claus without those guys here. There's an AAX Air Splash 8-inch. There is a 20-inch garage ride here, the big brother of this one. There is a 17-inch HHX complex thin crash and 19 over here. There's still a stack which consists of a 12-inch Holy China, mini Holy China, and a 10-inch Radia Splash. And once again, the 7-inch Alu Bell and Gone Bob's Cowbell, Mapex drums, Evans drum heads, my signature Pro Mark drumstick, and just to give you a little tour of about the candy store here. So, all right. So, I mean, time flies by. So, what about having Christian back on the screen, and let's see what your questions are here.
Great lesson, Claus. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's see. I mean, the last one I see is from Pedro Barahona from Chile. Carlos Salvatierra is here as well. So, and Michael Scott from Canada. Okay, Michael Scott says, Claus Hessler, are you still planning to write a book on the collapsed rudiments concept? Yes, I do, Michael. So, so that little PDF that you maybe already downloaded is just a super short glimpse of it. I got about 60 pages ready now, so so there's some good progress with that. I'm going to be publishing it, of course, together with Dom Famularo, because it was actually Chapin's wish on the deathbed, I should say, that he wanted the two of us to complete that idea, which we are now taking care of, and it's going to be amazing. I really feel that this ties it all together, and all the stuff I did so far with educational releases comes to full circle. So what else do we have? The sound is incredible, writes You Can Drum Yudi. Fascinating to see new configurations. Thanks. Yeah, man. So I'm just scrolling down for questions, but it almost seems there are no. You guys have no questions. Is that really true? Roman Kvasnikov is here from Russia. Very good. Paulo from Brazil. Yeah, right.
Peter Graf is asking which rudiments you would start Now they're coming in.
Okay. With which rudiments would you start playing them collapsed? Very good question. I mean, one of the first things you can actually do is really trying to have just single strokes. Say, for instance, something like this. First unison, and then shifting one hand to flams, to widening the flam, to this, and closing it once again until you're back in unison. I mean, and all that pretty much while you keep the pulse going. You always make sure that this is solid, and you don't fool around with the pulse, which I think is super important in that case. So that would possibly be the first thing. Another thing would for sure be, say, double strokes into flams, unison, back to the flams maybe, and back to the doubles. Those are usually the first steps you actually take. And in the book, we're also going to be starting as easy as that. So collapsed rudiments, just in case you wonder, it's nothing that is only for the upper league of drummers. Once you played your 10,000 plus hours, it's really a concept that everybody can use, no matter how simple the phrase really is. Okay, so good question here. So what else have we got?
So Klaus, there's a question from Paul Hamela on this about the second example that you demonstrate.
The second example. So what was the second example?
Said some left-handed displacement through the grid, starting unison with the right hand.
Okay.
And making a whole cycle. How do you start developing that? Do you think about subdivisions, or is it just feeling?
It's honestly, I really don't think about subdivisions. Let me switch the camera one more time, because you don't see as good as it should be. So I really don't think about subdivisions. It's really much more about being in control of that, and you just give up control to a certain degree. Even you just let this happen, and as a starting point, maybe possibly imagine you keep this going and you play something against it from your other hand, which has no connection at all to this. I mean, really, literally no rhythmic connection. Imagine something like, and you just keep this going like forever. Honestly, I have no idea what that looks like on paper, what I just played now. I expect it must be pretty complicated, but I don't even care. It's just I just do that, and there is no mystery about the grip. You could even do that with your fist. So in the very same way, coming back to the questions, when I play this, for a good part, I do not think about grit. I'm just with the motions and with the movements, and I try to keep the pulse solid. So the only thing that's really in my mind is understanding this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The rest is just like a rubber band. You can and do all kinds of funny things with that. So I mean, so far with that question, good one. Okay.
So Jim Farray got a question. Any tips for getting comfortable moving between rhythmic versions of the same sticking? Tagwachtstreich or French fries? My brain doesn't find it easy to recognize the patterns as the same very quickly.
Mhm. That's actually that's a good question, because making your hands believe you still play the same rhythm is something which doesn't really happen in your hands. It's something which happens up here. So, for instance, like playing a double drag. And going into the septuplet from the quintuplet structure is something which needs to take place up here. Your hands should have the tools down, but still there's a couple of aspects which I think are important. First of all, the dynamics may seem to make that whole process much more complicated, but they also help a lot, because they add the dynamics, the accents, they add orientation towards what you're doing. So, so when you play this, I sort of still hear the same rhythm. It reminds me of what I did in the bar before. And another big help, for instance, is trying to go through all the inverted versions of the double drag tap, so you don't just practice this, but for sure you also practice and then you also expand that. And to complete my answer, I mean, the importance of understanding the dynamic background in terms of the accents, that's something very important to understand. And I remember Chapin fooling around even with, say, constructing polyrhythms out of that. So, for instance, if I remember in one lesson, he was trying to teach me 5/4, something like. Something like that, and Chapin would just say, "Oh, you just take the bossa nova phrase. You know the bossa nova phrase, Klaus? It's this here." And I said, "Wait a second, Jim. I know the bossa nova, but this is not 5/4." And he said, "Yeah, but no worries. You just even that out. You start with the bossa nova pattern, and you make even distances from stroke to stroke, and you end up having 5/4. Check this out." I really can't do it now, but it's on the way there. And I mean, Jim was just trying to do it by rhythmic imagination. And without doing the math. Okay, it's a quintuplet, and you need to hit like every fourth position of the quintuplet. As opposed to that, you just pick a phrase that has 5 beats, and you even out the distances between the strokes, and you get the polyrhythm, which is, I mean, quite interesting approach to do. And I mean, you may argue if that's the only way to get there, but for sure it's a very musical idea. Okay. But anyhow, going through all the different settings of a rudiment and playing them, and always watching out for the accents is for sure very important. Good one, Jim. So let's see, what else have you got here?
Matt Kent's just about downloading the PDF. I think the link is in the stream. About getting fast foot, maybe some exercises for
Exercises for what?
For fast feet.
Fast
Right.
food. Holy
Fast food.
Christ. Okay. That's really hard to say in a short amount of time, but I'll just try to do my best and change something about the lighting situation here. So when I'm using double bass stuff, for instance, which I suppose the question is after. Let me switch the camera real quick, and put this guy down here. So what I usually do is I use a lot of double stroke action in terms of. So what I really do is I'm just trying to use as much of that, say, heel toe movement in both of my feet to allow for the best and most fluid and most comfortable movement. Frankly speaking, I'm not too great with alternating single strokes. I'm quite okay with that, but I'm not the king of single strokes, as I'm possibly not the king of double pedal as well. But it's just I can apply some of my hand stuff in a pretty obvious way to the feet, and make a pretty good copy of what my hands can do with my feet. But I'm for sure not a metal guy, so I really admire those people who can play all that fast stuff, fast single strokes, which is for sure not my kind of thing. Not that I don't like it. It's just not happening in the music I play. With Flux, I use it for soloing and I use it for some groove ideas, but that's pretty much it. But as far as speed goes, I just try to use as much of that rocking heel toe motion as possible, and trying to use the same principles from the feet that I do from my hands, which is just trying to keep, just as I'm trying to keep the stick always in motion, I'm trying to keep the beater in motion. I'm never, say, pressing the beater into the head and burying it inside the head. It's just always allowing for reaction. So in a nutshell, that's, answering your question would take much more than just this, but I hope that helps at a certain degree. Good one.